Good evening. The last thing anyone needs from me right now is a reminder of how the world and all our lives have changed over the last couple of months. But I'd like to begin with my solidarity for anyone worried about loved ones or who has lost them in recent times. Even in these days of social distancing, self-isolation, and all these bitter pills, words, and practices, you are not alone. We're virtually, but not actually together. Some of us have sufficient health, food, shelter, and internet access to be able to engage in this discussion. And that places us under greater duty constantly to think about those who don't. Our response to this global pandemic, here and internationally, will either exacerbate every inequality, inconsistency, and injustice in how we share the planet, or begin to bring us closer together. The world before COVID-19 is past. The status quo ante not an option. I know that this brings terror to some, hope to others, and a strange cocktail of both to many. These are hugely dangerous and difficult times, but I believe that a combination of innovation, imagination, empathy, and millennia of experience and learning will help us find our way through. And any brighter future must have human rights values at its centre. We've called this talk Looking Down on Human Rights because of its ambiguity, or at least the choice it presents between discarding values or being guided by them, even in times of emergency. Just as the word security conjures either incarceration or comfort, lockdown can signify protection or prison, depending on our circumstances, attitude, and the practical approach of those in power. So what do I mean by human rights values? Well, firstly, I don't mean unfettered freedom. In reality, there's never been such a thing. Unrestrained liberty for the wolf looks rather less attractive to the lamb. Even a so-called free market requires a great deal of rules of the game to prevent people robbing and cheating each other, to bind them to the deals they strike in good faith, prevent cartels and monopolies that eat the choice and competition on which the market is supposed to depend. And that's before you even get into debates about employment, consumer environmental protections. The functioning of the free market has always required significant regulation to keep it that way. And the same is true of democracy. What's the value of elections if people don't have the vote or are intimidated against using it? What if a winner-take-all government were to use its massive majority one year to censor and silence critics, imprison opponents, or even to postpone further elections? Just like the market, democracy is capable of eating itself and descending into something quite different. So some of our rights and freedoms, notably to vote in free elections, associate with each other and speak, sometimes privately and sometimes in public, are almost the equivalent of fair competition rules for democracy. And at the most basic level, each human being needs a great deal of freedom, protection, and nurturing to survive, let alone thrive. Our human rights tradition recognizes this and our essence as amazing individual creatures, but social creatures nonetheless. We need protection from interference, intrusion, oppression, and cruelty, but also from infection, isolation, destitution, and starvation. And as reflected in the name of this festival, we must have light, or at least the opportunity to find it in fuller lives of the heart, mind, body, and soul. You wouldn't dream of inviting a guest into your home to share in the food and shelter, but not the music and discussion. Attempts to dismiss either civil and political freedoms or social, economic, and cultural rights are just as foolish. Nor is this a vain attempt at eliminating risk from our lives. The wartime generation responsible for the settlement knew all too well how impossible that would be. Instead, they were concerned with valuing life and not allowing the powerful to take reckless risks with the lives of others. Post-World War II human rights are a legal and ethical framework of rights, freedoms, and protections, all springing from the idea that all human lives matter and that we're born equal in our dignity and worth. Thirdly, it's so important to emphasize that this is not just about law. Human rights values form part of our ethical and political thinking as well. So those who say the problem with demanding rights is that it avoids responsibility couldn't be more wrong. Your right can't be delivered without my obligation to respect it. It's of course correct that in law, states have the ultimate responsibility for protecting the human rights of their people. But these rights can never be a practical reality without a great deal of legal and moral responsibility on all people as well. Take the rare and absolute right not to be subject to inhuman and degrading treatment or torture. That's not just about military and police personnel the world over being prohibited from behaving that way, nor is it merely about states providing and enforcing adequate criminal laws against violent and sexual offences. It's about how we treat each other when no one's looking and the vulnerable can't complain in the home, hospital, care home, police station and nursery. There'll never be enough legislators or police officers on the planet to deliver human rights by law alone. And even if there were, who would protect us from them? So those who attack human rights for blurring the line between law and politics are also missing the point. There has never been a bright line between law, politics, economics, culture, and religion for that matter. Human rights values are both shaped by them and animators of the same. There are, of course, perfectly proper debates to be had about how best to promote, inspire, deliver, or enforce certain outcomes at certain times. Sometimes the lever you need is encouragement, sometimes investment, sometimes hard-edged law, including a range of sanctions. Often, it's a combination of all three. So we have a long-developed and hard-won system of international human rights. It contains checks and balances and rights and freedoms for our civil and political, social, economic, and cultural life at home, work, in our democracy and wider world. It doesn't solve all our complex problems, but it gives us a compass to help in their navigation and some tests for our proposed solutions. So far, so good. So why still so controversial? In my experience, everyone loves certain human rights, their own. It's other people's protections that are sometimes somewhat harder to swallow. My speech is free, yours is a little more expensive. I want the right to travel and entertain myself unhindered, even during a global pandemic, even poisoning the planet in the process. I'll take my own risks, thank you, as I do when I drink or smoke or eat unhealthy food, in spite of the advice to the contrary. That's surely my right as a free-born Englishman. Well, yes, to a degree. But we've long said that you can't drive the car or fly the plane whilst intoxicated because of the risk that you inflict upon other people. We've more recently prevented you from smoking in certain closed environments for a similar reason. And now, just because you feel the reckless invincibility of a lifetime of privilege, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't balance your right to roam against the rights of others around you, and especially the health workers professionally and ethically bound to pick up the pieces when your hitherto considerable luck or that of others around you at the roulette table runs out. The reason why human rights have often proved so controversial is that they belong to everyone equally, whether we like them or not, and must be applied with an even hand.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below, or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.